So it's an honor to be here. I'm really glad to be here. And I know you hear that from every speaker that gets on stage, but I sincerely mean it. First of all, I'm a California native, born in San Francisco. And Michelle mentioned for 5 years I did IT governance evangelism, or evangelized IT governance on behalf of CA Technologies. Traveled around the world, and the vast majority of my speaking gigs were outside of the state, almost exclusively on the East Coast and in other countries. I didn't get to speak in California that much. Since starting my own company, I'm a lot more local, and my wife and my 2 kids are glad for that. And I love doing things in my home state. And I've had the opportunity to actually work in a couple of California government venues. So being here today, it's really awesome. Out of all of that information that was just shared about my background, simply said, I really want you to know I'm an IT guy. I started my professional career in IT, and I've spent my entire professional career working with information technology, and that's what I'm going to do till I'm done. IT is basically my life. So what is an IT guy doing up here doing a keynote at a project management forum? It's basically because I love project management. And that might sound bizarre coming from an IT guy. My first experience in project management, and boy, really going to date myself here, was when I started my IT career in the Navy as one of their first data processing analysts. And I was on a ship for 3 years, and then they gave me a nice cushy role in Coronado, the Naval Regional Data Automation Center. And for the first year there, I worked in operations with a bunch of other Navy folks. There were about 40 of us there, but the vast majority of folks were federal government, civil servants. The Pentagon had just formed a new organization called the Teleprocessing Organization, and they took literally they're the 6 smartest people out of the 400 people that were working there, and they put them in this organization to start looking at remote communications for computers, and it was brand new. I mean, we had 1,200 baud modems that were probably twice the size of a large stereo receiver, and that was, a big deal. I managed to see that there was an opening. There was a billet that was left for a sailor, and I was managed to wedge my way in there. I got in there, and there were, like I said, these 6 brilliant people. Half of them were wondering how much coffee and donuts I could get them during the course of the day. The other half of them basically taught me everything that I was willing to learn, and I was willing to learn everything. There was one man in the group, and his name was Richard. And Richard was the epitome of the antisocial techie. I mean, he was the stereotype before the stereotype existed, because this is 1980. So nobody ever wanted to work with Richard, and Richard was fine with that. Richard was fine doing things on his own. So one of the projects that they gave him was he was supposed to take a Burroughs Mini system and convert it into a telecommunications front end. And in theory, this could be done. And Burroughs said it could be done, but it had never been done. We're basically converting, like I said, I was going to date myself, our card punch key entry into dumb terminals. And these dumb terminals were going to basically connect to this Burroughs system. Richard had already written the code, so he had the code ready to go. So now it was a matter of implementing the code and then installing the networking, the RS-232 cables, holy cow, the dumb terminals, all the things that had to get to actually install the technology. So I started working with Richard. I said, yeah, I'm happy to work with them. And Richard said, okay, great. Here's our project, and here's our project plan. And it was the first time I'd ever been exposed to project management. And back in 1980, in IT, we were not using project management. We were just starting to, and it was mostly in the systems development lifecycle, doing applications development. But the idea of using it to install a computer, no, we left that to our technicians, and they just did the voodoo that they did. It didn't always work, but they didn't have to follow this methodology. Richard believed in the methodology. He was a project manager, even before people were being asked to be project managers, and he exposed me to this. It spoke to me. I loved all of the components, all the aspects, all the things that project management did. And from that day on to the rest of my career, I applied project management to any of the discrete efforts that I had where there was a very specific beginning and a very specific output that I was supposed to create. I wasn't doing it because someone was telling me, here's project management methodology, you have to follow this. I was doing it because it enabled me to get my work done. Again, made me an anachronism, an anomaly in the IT world, because none of my compatriots in IT were embracing this idea of applying this methodology to everything we did and not just systems development. So I was in love with project management. What I didn't know, and I found out, is probably about 10 years later, that I was actually in love with process management. So think about that. You have an IT guy standing up here that's not just in love with project management, he loves process management. And boy, you get the groans when you tell people we're going to put in a new process. And then about 10 years after that, I found out it wasn't actually process management, it was governance. And more specifically, IT governance, the most misunderstood enterprise discipline out there right now. And I've spent the last 8 years now, and I'll spend the rest of my career trying to convince folks that IT governance is the key to getting the most value out of our technology investment. Now, there are a lot of components of IT governance. When I talk in project management forums, mostly PMI forums, the areas that I get into are product and portfolio management, with all things being equal is my favorite of the many governance processes. Vetting those decisions on what we're going to invest in, which products or programs we're going to sanction. And then I also talk about PMOs, because once we launch that, PMO is a construct that we like to put in place to actually ensure its success. Those are generally the two presentations that I give when I talk to project management forums. This is a bit of a departure for me. I very rarely get to talk about the machinations of project management, get into the details of project management. And to some extent, I'm really not going to get into a lot of those today. I haven't managed a program since 1995. I mean, I've been involved with countless products and programs, but I haven't actually had accountability for a long time. So it's not necessarily the thing that I talk about. When CA and public sector partners approached me and said, here's what we want you to talk about, and they gave me this title, Why Do You Matter in the Project Lifecycle? They gave me insight into the venue and the way they were setting up and some of the challenges that the state was trying to overcome, but they gave me lots of latitude to interpret what exactly that meant and what exactly I would present. And they said, just go for it. Get up there and talk about it. And I started thinking about, okay, why do you matter? Why do you matter in the project management lifecycle? So I thought about that, and I thought, okay, well, the first thing I want to do is the yous they're talking about. Who are the yous that we're even talking about? And you could go to the public sector partner site. They have their project delivery summit information on there, and there's an event description. You have to read the event description, because basically what it contains was a description of the six, oops, how'd that happen? Of the six, stealing a little thunder there. The 6 roles that they were going to be talking about. And those are the tracks that you're exposed to here today as well. Those are the 6 major roles. So, okay, these are the U's. These are the project management U's. Why do these roles matter in the project management lifecycle? Well, it was very obvious to me when I looked at these roles, and with my affinity and fraternity with project management, I was very quickly able to just scribble things right off the top of my head. Okay, well, if we want to talk about why the role matters, let's talk about what the role does, and it's obvious what the role does, and every one of these is absolutely essential to project management and project management success. So should I craft a presentation where I go into some of the nuances and specifics about these attributes, et cetera? Well, heck, I'm doing this during a lunch hour. We could spend all day on any one of these topics talking about why these roles matter, what they do, and the value that they bring, and how essential they are to the success of any product or program. And frankly, that'd be redundant. I mean, that's what you're doing here. And I don't have all day to talk about each one of these roles. In fact, if I try to do that in an hour, I might leave you with a nugget here or there, a thing maybe you didn't contemplate about this role or the other, but I think generally, and you already saw it, what I would probably end up with is this. It'd be collective. I don't think I could offer anything in an hour that's specific about any one of those positions that I think that you don't already know. And if you didn't know it, then I bet some of the things that you encountered this morning have provided you some of that insight. And I'm certain that the afternoon, as you continue through some of the other courses, you're going to get even more of that insight. And I guarantee there are folks in this room that could get up here, a number of you, and talk about any one of those areas and really get into not just how critical they are and what they involve, but the specifics about performing those roles in a public sector organization, and more specifically in the state of California, and more specifically in the situations that you find yourself today. So that's not the thing I'm looking for. I don't want to receive a collective duh when I'm done. So now, why do these roles matter? Again, fairly obvious why these roles matter, but why does anybody really need to be told? And more specifically, the people that are performing the roles, why would you need to be told that these roles matter? And I think there's some valid reasons. And here's the first one, project failure rates. I've been talking about project failure rates for about 7 years now. And this is a statistic I use. And a lot of people don't like the statistic, and a lot of people, they really bristle at it. I actually think it's kind. I would probably put it somewhere around 60 to 65%. Every study that I've seen for the last 2 decades, and I looked back when I started looking at this, puts it at least 50%. Now, for those of you familiar with the Standish Group, they have something called the Chaos Report they come out with every couple of years. You'll see their figures somewhere around 24%. But if you look, they actually have 3 categories. So when I think of project failure, it's very simple. I'm very black and white. I'm very absolute. And frankly, it's one of the complaints people will have about this discussion. Either the product is successful or it's failed. It's one of the 2 things. And when I talk about project failure, what constitutes the failure of a project is we didn't finish it when we said we were going to finish it, it cost more than we said it was going to cost, or we didn't deliver the business value or the capability that we said it was going to deliver. If we don't do those things, then it failed. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't have done the project. Not at all. In fact, very few of our projects come in on time or come in on budget or deliver exactly what we said we were going to deliver. So it doesn't mean because a project failed that we shouldn't have done it. The reason I use the word failed is because it's nothing more than a state indicator. It just says we set these thresholds. When we went to someone and said, let's do this project or program, the things that they considered most was how much is it going to cost, how long is it going to take, and what are you going to deliver when you're done? Based on those answers, someone will say, yes, let's do this. If we don't meet those parameters, if we don't meet those thresholds, and we'll give them some variances, some allowances for how much longer it could take or how much more it might cost. But if we don't meet them, then it's a failure. So what happens when I hear it's a failure? That's a state indicator, and I want that flag to go up because as soon as that flag goes up, I'm called to action. What can we do about this? What can we do to stop this failure, to turn this failure into a success? Let's get together and let's work on this. So I want that flag. I want to know when a product is failing, and I want that flag to come up right away. When I go to companies, and one of the first things I want to talk about when they talk about their project or program challenges, one of the first questions I ask is, what is your project failure rate? And they'll balk at the answer, they'll wince, and they'll say, well, our projects don't really fail. And then I'll share this way of viewing it with them, and generally they don't agree with it. You know, the idea is no, you're being a little too harsh, it's too much of a failure. In fact, I find very few organizations that even use the F word. It's a title of a blog post I think I did about 3 or 4 years ago. Does your company use the F word? Can you use the word failure? And Holly mentioned it this morning. There's an aversion to it. And it's not just a corporate or cultural or enterprise or an organizational aversion. There's a human aversion to the term failure. And it's too bad because it's that aversion that causes us to rationalize why our projects aren't failures after all and why not hitting those thresholds, not hitting those marks, not meeting those goals or objectives is okay. And it's too bad. Because as I mentioned before, when I see that failure flag go up, it launches us into action. We get together and we figure out what we can do about it. And even most importantly, what can we learn from it? Because there is so much information. There's so much to learn from anything that fails. But that's generally not the response. If that flag goes up in an organization, it isn't, let's get everybody together. We've got a failure. What can we do? Let's learn from this. It's really, okay, we've got a failure. Let's get everybody together because we're going to figure out whose fault it is. We're going to figure out who's wrong. If that's the response, if it's punitive when that state indicator goes up, I guarantee you're not going to see that state indicator. People aren't going to be coming and running up and saying, my project's failing, my project's failing. Because instead of people getting help when they say that, they know that the response is going to be punitive. So there's a cultural thing, there's a human thing. We don't like it, we don't use it. But that explains, hopefully, why I say that we got a high project failure rate. And I mentioned the Standish report earlier. They don't have black and white. They don't have 2 categories, success or failure. They actually say failed, challenged, and succeeded. And in the Standish report, I think it's about a 25% mark for the failed. But that's projects where they never even finish. They're just abandoned. Nothing ever comes of it. There's about 35 to 40%, depending on the report that you're reading, that they call challenged. And guess what that is? It took longer than we said, cost more than we said, didn't deliver what we said. So you actually add those numbers together, and now you see those numbers at about 65, 70%, which is very, very high. So we have this high project failure rate. Now, talking about project failure rates to a room full of project managers isn't exactly going to get everybody excited. It's not going to endear any of you to me. So I'm going to let you off the hook. In studying this, I found that there are 3 things that I think lend themselves the most to project failure, and this is the first one, especially in IT projects. We don't pay attention to the business process change. In fact, we don't pay attention to processes and business processes. Whatever technology or capability or system or service that we're installing, there is an existing way of doing business. There's an existing business process. That needs to be changed as well. It's not just the technology that's going to change how things are done, it's also the accompanying business process. Most organizations aren't good at process management in the first place, let alone now introducing a new system or capability that changes the nature of that process. So we just don't pay enough attention to it. We don't do something about that. They blame the technology when in fact we haven't made the commensurate or appropriate business changes. Another one is inattention to organizational transformation. Now a lot of people will see that and they'll say, wait a second, you were just talking about that. No, now I was talking about the business processes, those activities, those tasks, those methodologies, policy standards, our approach to getting work done, how things are defined. This gets to the human dimension. Because even if I pay attention to those business processes, let's say I do a good job of modifying them, coming up with a new one. We do that cutover over the weekend. Everybody leaves on Friday. We do that cutover. We put in that system. We put in that new good business process. And then Monday comes around and we find out, wait a second, the humans, they're not doing it. Why aren't the humans doing it? And it's probably because we haven't paid enough attention to that transformation that needs to take place on an organizational and human level. Because and again, this is coming from an IT guy. We're about systems and solutions and these really cool ways of doing things, but what it boils down to is what are we all trying to do? We're all trying to affect human behavior. Somebody is doing something one way before we deliver that project or program solution, and when we're done, they have to do it a different way. That requires organizational transformation. That requires affecting human behavior, and again, it's something that I don't think organizations pay enough attention to and really do well enough. Another reason I think projects fail, inadequate project governance. And there's 2 dimensions to project governance. First of all, the obvious one, the vetting of products and programs, the product and portfolio management, the thumbs up or thumbs down to yes, we are or we are not going to do this project or program. And there's more to PPM than just that, the vetting of projects and programs, saying whether or not we should. And for years, organizations, they did everything. I mean, you've heard IT saying, you know, every project is a number 1 priority, which is a complete cop-out, because I guarantee you could look at any investment, you should be able to tell which one is going to deliver the most value, and that's the one you should focus on primarily with all those constrained resources. But it's more than just that. So I've seen organizations put that vetting process in place, and it's absolutely essential. You want to make sure you have constrained resources. You want to make sure that they're working on the things that are the most important. So we put that governing body together, and we bring them the business cases, and they say thumbs up or thumbs down. They're not done yet. In fact, I came up with a model about 3 years ago, that actually talks about the different components and elements of PPM, because there's more than just saying thumbs up or thumbs down. I call it the SCAD model. Because PPM asks and answers 4 questions. Should we? Can we? Are we? And did we? All the PPM I've ever seen, all those governing bodies, and a lot of times they're mistakenly called IT governance, when there's much more to IT governance than just making decisions about our investment in technology. All of them do the thumbs up, the thumbs down, the yes, no, the should we do it. In that same breath, in that same conversation, they should be saying, not only is this going to give us all this ROI or our constituents all this benefit, we have to ask, can we do it? Do we have the money? Do we have the time? Do we have the people? Do we have the proficiency? What is it going to mean when we take this new piece of work and inflict it on existing work and existing organizational constructs? Can we do this? Very important question. A lot of times, though, and I'm not necessarily letting this governing body off the hook, but a lot of times, even if they ask that question, we couldn't provide them the information because we don't have good resource management, good demand management. We don't really understand the relationship between all the things that are going on. So frankly, we don't know we can, so we just do it and we find out if we can. But PPM, done properly with the right information, can ask and answer that question. We're still not done with that governing body. We're still not done with PPM. Now, once we say yes, yes we should, yes we can, go, they should be saying now, bring me back evidence that the decision we just made was a good decision. Did we make a good decision? Which means now as a project, a program progresses, we're reporting back to that governing body and saying, yes, here's evidence that it's going to cost what we said it was going to cost. Yes, here's evidence that it's going to take as long as we said it was going to take. Yes, here's evidence that the benefits that we expect are not eroding, and we're on the path to see the value that we committed to when we first sanctioned this project or program. In the absence of that evidence, that committee has a decision to make. Okay, things are taking longer than we thought, or they're costing more than we thought, or you know what, those benefits are starting to erode. We don't think we're going to deliver what we said we're going to deliver. They have to ask, should we fix it, give it more money, more time, whatever, or do we kill it? And I'll tell you what, one of the best things about PPM, of good investment, is killing projects. I love to kill projects. Because I would much rather have a $5 million mistake than a $50 million mistake. And it's that oversight, that collection of information from many of the people that are here in this room that enables those people that are responsible for the investment that they sanctioned as to say whether or not we should continue and whether or not we're on track. And then last but not least, and that isn't done nearly enough, if at all, last but not least, the did we. Benefits realization. Everybody here knows what that is, and everybody knows almost nobody does it. And it's this committee that I'm holding responsible for those benefits being realized. Not the project manager, not even the project or program sponsor. They're the ones that said yes. They're the ones that provided the oversight during its execution. They're the ones that I'm going to hold accountable as to whether or not it actually did what they said it was going to do. Because if it didn't, my question is, why didn't you do something about it? Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you fix it? Why didn't you kill it? Do something about it. That project governance, that advanced level of PPM, frankly, I very rarely see it. Now, I said I was going to let you back. I said I was going to let you off the hook. Now I'm going to put you back on the hook. There's also the project management dimension of project governance. Very few people look at project management as a governance process, as a governance mechanism, when it is by far one of the oldest governance mechanisms that we have at our disposal. It's all about governance, which is decision making. It's all about setting up the mechanics, the roles, and the processes that enable us to make the right decision to continue to move forward and try to get something to succeed. So we could talk about all these things, but the dimension that we're going to focus on today is project management. And what's good about this, if we've got good project management and good product and portfolio management, we can almost always overcome. We can kind of push up against some of those challenges that I first listed. In fact, I would argue project management also provides us a lot of the data and a lot of the insight to show us when our product and portfolio management isn't working well as well. So yes, there are many things, but there are absolutely things that we can do about project management. And first and foremost, a product shouldn't ever fail because we didn't project manage it well. I mean, there's enough challenge out there already without saying, well, we did a bad job of project managing it, especially with the maturity of project management processes that exist today. So, is this discussion of our projects failing and the failure rates enough for everyone to be convinced that those roles that we've listed and the roles that you're focusing on today all matter, doing those things in concert, putting those things into a cohesive team and executing? Is that enough to convince everybody, yeah, you know what, these roles matter because we don't want projects to fail? I don't think it's as big of a duh, but I still think it's kind of a duh. Yes, obviously, that's obvious. So, why are we asking the question? Why does anybody need to ask the question, why do these roles matter? So, let's move from the roles and get back to the pronoun that was in the title of the presentation. It's really, why do you matter? And a valid reason to ask, why would somebody have to ask that question and discuss why anyone matters in this effort? And frankly, you may not be engaged in your work. Now, when I started putting this presentation together, I walked you through a few things. I never once considered I was going to talk about the roles. I mean, I had a good idea of what the storyline was about and the logic path that I wanted to take you on. And I knew that I was going to get to a point where I was going to talk about the level of engagement of the average American worker. And unfortunately, I was fairly optimistic that I'd be able to Google and find plenty of studies and plenty of evidence, and hopefully from someone that you would recognize that, in fact, you know what, there's a problem with employee engagement. And I would show you 2 or 3 examples. The very first hit I got, it didn't take long at all. And it's a report that came out this year from the Gallup poll. So I don't have to worry about getting more. I mean, Gallup's pretty reputable. And it's a report that they came out this year, and it's not just based on 1 year. It's a report that's based on 3 years' worth of data. And it's actually the continuation of a report that they started in 2008. And it's something they've been studying for a long time. Now, obviously, the results aren't good. Otherwise, I wouldn't be, using it here in this forum. But they found out some key things, and here they are at a very high level. Less than a third of U.S. workers are what they consider to be actively engaged in their work. And what they found was it's actually 2 to 1. 60% are plain not engaged. And they said 70%, 7 out of 10 workers were not getting the most out of them that they could possibly deliver to their organization and to their work efforts. And obviously it's costing a lot of money. I was going to say $500 billion, like that's a big, it's like, why doesn't trillion sound like a lot of money anymore? That's terrible. But it's a lot of money. That engagement's a problem. Now, I would move on to my next point, but I want to share, if you look at their study, and you can find out there in the public domain, they've got some answers in there for you. And I'm not necessarily saying I advocate or agree with these answers. In fact, you're going to find I kind of take exception to them a little bit. But here they are. They basically said managers. It's up to managers. You have to recognize the strength in your workers and exploit that strength. And if you do, they'll be engaged. It makes sense, and there's a lot more information, and there's a lot more insight and anecdotes as to why this is true. And they offer some good suggestions on what you could do to increase that engagement. And I would say, okay, if I ignore some of the other things that I believe, and let's just say for the sake of this conversation, I agree. Okay, that's going to engage employees. But there's actually 2 dimensions of employee engagement, and you actually represent the other dimensions. So there's the first one, are people engaged in their work? And Gallup thinks, okay, it's up to managers to engage people in their work, and if they do those things that they offered in their report, you'll be able to raise that level of employee engagement. But is that enough? So let's say we do those things and everyone's engaged in their work. Does that necessarily mean that they're going to be engaged in their project work? In fact, I would argue that you could get that success in their work efforts, but that doesn't mean that my projects are going to stop failing anymore. So, who engages project workers, not just workers in general? Who engages the project workers? Is it those managers that Gallup was talking about? And I would say that's not likely that they're going to engage them. In fact, few managers are incented to ensure projects succeed. In many cases, managers have their mandates. Managers have a set group of deliverables that they're responsible for delivering. And oh yeah, by the way, you're not going to get enough people to do it. And oh yeah, by the way, some product manager is going to come knocking at your door, asking to borrow some of those resources so they can work on a project. What's that manager? First, the manager is going to say, don't answer the door, don't answer the door. Next thing is, if they have to open the door, they're probably going to do the Jedi mind trick. These are not the resources you're looking for. I can't blame them. One of the things that I insist every organization does is for every manager who is supposed to contribute out of their constrained group of resources to project success, you put it in their performance plans. There has to be an objective that says, okay, yes, you delivered this. Okay, let's get to this one. Did the resources you were responsible for allocating to projects, did they meet all of their project commitments? We have to give them a vested interest in ensuring that these projects succeed. And frankly, for a lot of functional managers, that vested interest isn't there. So it's something we have to build into our organizational construct. We have to build into their roles. But in the meantime, that, frankly, it's not there for you, and you're not going to get that overnight. There'll be resistance. So I mentioned already who engages them. The project manager goes knocking on the door. It's up to project managers to engage those people on projects, take those workers and get them to meet their project commitments. So how do they engage project workers? Well, we send them to professional cat herding school. And I'm sure you've heard that before. Project managers, they're cat herders. That's what they are, getting out there. And no, we don't send them to cat herding school. We send them to influence management training, or facilitative leadership training, or matrix management training. We give them all these tools and means and methods by which they can go ahead and get people out there who are resistant to work on these projects, with functional managers that are literally pulling them back in the other direction, and find a way to get those people and engage them on those projects and that project success. And frankly, I think it's a near impossible mission. We do it, and I think we do it because of the advances in project management methodology. I think it's in advances in some of the things I described, and I think it's the heroics of many project managers out there. It's relationships. There's any number of reasons why it works, but it's not a systematic capability. I really believe that when I see it occurring well, people are almost doing the impossible. It's a very difficult proposition. And why is that? And I actually looked online and said, okay, well, it's the silos. And I was going to find pictures of grain silos. And I went, and I don't have that screen. I can't see it, so I have my glasses on. But I wanted to mention the name of the company because it's their graphic. And I really loved it because not only do they have my grain silos, but they put people in those grain silos. And that's what it is. We're function-centric. We are in our silos, and that's what we pay attention to. That's what we care about. So when that project manager comes and says, let's get together, everybody, he's got to get people out of those silos, and it's a very, very difficult thing to do. That's where end-to-end process comes in. I don't want functional silos. What I want are end-to-end processes. And one of the reasons I love process management, good process management. Because good process management, what does it do? It identifies that customer. Why are we doing this? Who's at the end of this process? And it creates acute focus on that customer for everyone working in that process. Then it defines how the work is done. Who does it? Where do they do it? When do they do it? How do they do it? What are they doing? It makes work possible, and it makes work practical once we put in the oversight of process management that ensures that the process is as optimal as possible. Process brings that to bear. And it takes everybody out of their silos, all those disparate piece parts of that puzzle, and it puts them together. And now, in that center where I've got those hands, those are all people that I've pulled out of those silos, and they're working as one. They're working as a single team in this process construct. Now, I'm not presenting this as if, okay, now you guys got to go out there and do process. In fact, this is not new. I mean, there are years, there's decades of the idea of business process management. And we're exposed to a lot of it just within IT. I guarantee you, everybody here has seen a cross-functional process design. They've seen a swim lane map. Here we are. We're designing these things. We're putting these things together. We're out there. Again, this isn't new. Not only that, beyond just those discrete processes that we're working on, there are massive frameworks that have been around for a long time. Now, granted, here's one idle. It's only been around in North America for about 10 years, really gained hold in the last 5 years. It actually invented in the UK almost 3 decades ago. A very process-centric framework, information technology infrastructure library. And what they basically did is said, you know what, IT is not about systems. They're not about just those big pieces of hardware they're sticking out there. IT is about services, so they call it service management. And they're moving us away from just focusing on services, and they're getting us to realize that what we're actually implementing and establishing is a service. Great concept. But what's really great about the IDLE framework is the way that it connects processes together. Again, those functional silos that we find in our own IT organizations. It talks about the relationship between incident management and problem management, and between change management and release management, and service level management, and capacity management, and availability management. All of those things, it cobbled them together in a very concrete process, end-to-end process construct. And again, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with IDLE or have heard of it, probably involved in an IDLE initiative. COBIT, the Control Objectives for IT, came out in the late 1990s. Granted, it started as an audit framework, but the latest version of COBIT, which came out in April of last year, version 5, is soup to nuts. I mean, they will tell, the people at ISACA, the Information Systems Audit Control Association, will tell you, this is it. This is the process construct, the process-centric construct for IT. And they've got tons of processes, very advanced. Again, it's their 5th version. They started with audit, then they moved on to control, then management, and then governance, and now they're calling it enterprise governance of IT. So very advanced process frameworks that are out there. Product management. There's an end-to-end process for you, and look at all the processes that we have within the PMBOK, now version 5. In fact, it was when I was putting this presentation together that I realized, oh wow, my slide just has PMBOK version 4. Version 5 came out, and I had to do a stare and compare, and I think they added one process and changed the name of another, but the processes are pretty much the same. So PMBOK, 5th version, very advanced. And for those of you using Prince 2, they came out with a new version of Prince 2 a couple of years ago. Very advanced processes that give us that end-to-end view of getting work done. So, with all those things I'm talking about, I've only mentioned a few. Why hasn't all that process methodology, why hasn't it fixed everything? Why do we still see those failure rates? Not only that, few organizations have implemented IDLE in its entirety. I'll go to an organization and I'll find some vestiges of service level management. Maybe they got incident and problem management. Maybe they're still trying to get that configuration management database up. But finding everything, and even if they've got most of it, I guarantee I'm probably not going to find financial management of IT services. Cost-based accounting, that's probably not going to see it. So we don't see it. And then COBIT, I have yet to see any organization that's implemented COBIT in its entirety, any version of COBIT. Again, vestiges and components of COBIT have been implemented. But we're doing something. I mean, I guarantee everybody here at one time or another has probably been involved in some process effort. So what have we actually implemented? And what we've done, and what I would argue that most of you have done, is you've implemented an intermediate process or a sub-process, and not that end-to-end process that we're talking about. We've implemented parts of IDLE, we've implemented parts of COBIT, but neither one in its entirety. And then we've actually have some new conventions. And I'm sure a lot of you here are familiar with agile development. Cool stuff. Really good stuff. I mean, instead of saying, let's boil the ocean and let's get all of our ducks in a row before we finally deliver something, it's an iterative process that identifies that highest component or function of value and gets it coded and gets it released very, very, very quickly. Sounds good. What I really love about agile development, though, is the fact that it took users and customers out of their silo and the developers out of their silo, and they put them in these scrum teams. That's what agile really does. It says, get out of your silos. You guys need to work together as a team. You need to do this collaboratively. I think that's the true value of agile methodology. You notice there in this graphic, there's a green arrow. And again, this is a native graphic. I didn't touch it. There's lots of agile graphics out there. It says release. So what we're actually doing with agile development, as wonderful it is, and again, for a system development lifecycle, I think it's amazing. We're actually talking about agile development, not agile deployment. So now we've got this release. It's not boiling the ocean. It's the highest piece of functional value that we can deliver. We'll get to those other functions later in our future iterations. But now we've got something good to go, and we know it's good to go. We know that we can do it. We know that the users want it. They've been working in these scrums. This is great. Let's go. And what happens? They get to operations, and operations says, whoa, where are you going with that code? And they call it the wall of confusion. So the developers, the users, they want change, and operations says stability. We want things to work well. So we'll see about getting that in. So you've been moving fast, and then all of a sudden, bang, you're against this wall. And a couple of years ago, people said, we can't hit a wall. And how many people here have heard of DevOps? Wow, still pretty new. It's been out for a couple of years now. And basically what it said was, we've created this code, let's get into operations. Okay, there's that wall of confusion. What does DevOps do? It takes the developers, again, out of their silo. They're already out of their silo. And it takes them with operations and it puts them into what? A single team. It has them working together on processes that they share. So now what we've done is we've broken up another silo. And now we're getting things into production faster when we're applying DevOps. When DevOps came out, I actually came out with a blog post, and I call it the Agile and DevOps Band-Aid. And it's not because I have an aversion. I think both of them are pieces of genius. But what they're doing is that end-to-end process I talked about, we don't have that. So what are they doing? They're putting Band-Aids. Okay, well here we've got a couple of functional groups that aren't working as a team. We'll give them a convention that enables them to work as a team. And now we've got the developers and operators. We'll give them a convention that helps them work as a team. So those silos that we've taken them out of, yes, we've taken them out of functional silos, but I argue we don't have those traditional silos anymore. What we have now are process silos. And DevOps and Agile ran against that process silo in operations. I will trade process silos for functional silos any day of the week. And I think it's a great step. And in fact, for most organizations, they'd be lucky to ever get to the point where they're just process silos. I can overcome a lot of the challenges and a lot of the issues and problems and risks associated with people being in these process silos much easier than if I was dealing with functional silos. I could get them onto those cohesive, collaborative teams much more easily. But it's still very much a silo construct. We still need those end-to-end processes. Very rare to see them. Very difficult to get them. We just don't find them out there. Why don't we have them? And here's where I go to the godfather of process management, Michael Hammer. Who here has heard of Michael Hammer? Michael Hammer. I was so fortunate. If I think of the 5 people that influenced my professional life during the course of my career, he would probably be near the top, probably 1 or 2. Godfather of process management. That's not to say that he's the inventor of it. In fact, my first, godfathers of process management were actually the grandfathers of project management. That was Gary Rumler and Alan Braish, who wrote a book that's still brilliant today, almost 40 years later. I think it might be 40 years. It was written, I think, in the earlier mid-'70s, called Performance Management. Really talked about processes, those end-to-end processes and the components of process management. What Michael did, though, Michael wasn't as concerned with methodology in the way that Gary Rumler and Alan Braish were. What Michael did is said, you know what? Process can transform the way our enterprises work, the way our enterprises function. It changes the nature of how work is done. And he looked at more than just the methodology. He started looking at the human factor in a way that no one had really looked at it before. And that includes Six Sigma. I mean, he talked about the transformative capability of process and process management. And I was very fortunate when Michelle introduced me this morning as a certified process master. That came from attending Michael Hammer's curriculum. And I actually attended it twice. I did it once on my own, and I took members of my organization through it at the time, through it again. And I was fortunate enough to actually work with Michael Hammer on something called the Phoenix Consortium, where he works with different people from organizations. And the product that I worked on him with was coming up with a maturity model for process management, because frankly, I don't like the CMMI maturity model. It's too one-dimensional. There are so many different things that determines whether or not you're mature at process. So it was awesome working on it with Michael. Unfortunately, we lost him 5 years ago. He was biking in the south of France and collapsed and came back to Cambridge, where he worked almost, predominantly with Harvard and MIT, and he died of a brain aneurysm. Company's still out there. I don't necessarily know how they're delivering things today, because he was the one that taught all of the courses, but a brilliant man. I'm introducing you to him because I want to use his words to really explain why we don't have those end-to-end processes. Now first, enjoy this slide for a couple minutes longer, because it's, I'm following the rules for PowerPoint presentations. It's a slide that's, not too many words, not too many bullets. It just kind of washes over you. And it's kind of fun doing this, putting this presentation together, because I could do a lot more graphics. Because generally when I get 60 minutes or 75 minutes to talk about IT governance in its entirety, there is so much detail in my slides. And it's not that I'm going over everything. It's just that I'm trying to give people an appreciation for the concepts. And my hope is they'll take that back to work and they'll have a PowerPoint they can actually reference as opposed to. This picture was supposed to symbolize what? So my stuff, I'm notorious for violating PowerPoint rules. So here I'm violating again. Not only that, I'm going to violate the golden rule of PowerPoint. I'm going to read you this slide. Because I can't read it enough. I'm serious. I love reading his words. Function-centric organizations are staffed by task workers with narrow perspectives and virtually total ignorance of the larger context in which they're working, in parochial organizational identification and affiliation, through which allegiance is given not to customer or company, but to function and unit. And incongruent measurement and reward systems that reinforce limited concerns, limited perspectives. The focus in a process is not on individual units of work, which by themselves accomplish nothing for a customer, but rather on an entire group of activities that, when effectively brought together, create a result that customers value. I've probably read that 1,000, I'm not kidding, 1,000 times. If I could pull up my sleeves right now and show you the goosebumps. It explains why we don't. We're function-centric. Becoming process-centric, if you attend my process presentation, it's almost an impossible journey. Very, very difficult to do. And more than anything else, I think his words explain it. We're entrenched in these function-centric organizations. Getting us to move to a process-centric organization is incredibly, incredibly difficult. This is a huge barrier. Beyond just those functional silos that create that huge barrier, because that's a pervasive construct, how many of us have the art and science of process management dialed in our enterprises? How many of us can say, yes, we have experts in process design, experts in process implementation, experts in managing a process once it's in place. We have process governance in place, and yes, we are institutionalizing our processes so they become part of the DNA of our organization. They're part of the fabric of the way we do things. Very, very rare. We don't, frankly, I love when I go to an organization and I see they're process experts, because I know they're investing a lot of money in people that do no work. They don't do any work. And I'll tell you what, that curriculum I mentioned with Michael Hammer costs about $15K. At least it did years ago. And I was taking whole organizations through. You can imagine the training budget over a year. It's huge. It's a big deal getting this expertise. Frankly, we just don't have it. So we're still left with this impossible mission. We have our functional silos, and we have to start herding cats. We have to find a way to overcome that. And that's where I say, thank goodness for project management. Because project management, there are so many things in the PMBOK now that you did not have in there 10 years ago, that talks about overcoming many of the challenges that I've just described. There are things we build in to overcome resistance of individuals to do their job. Think about that. The methodology addresses that issue. It addresses that risk. There's plenty there to tap. But that project management, it's only as good as those roles that we're contemplating how much they matter. Oh yeah, they matter. And not just those roles, our developers, our testers, systems analysts. There's a lot more roles. Our users. Everybody matters in that project management lifecycle. So let's move back to the program. Remember I said that who is you at the beginning? Why do you matter in the project lifecycle? So when I said the who is you, you are the who. And every other person on that project. There isn't a single person on that project that doesn't matter. Especially when we've cut things down to the bone and we're constrained and we do not have a surplus of individuals to work on these things. Everybody matters very, very much. So, that said, I've shared some challenges, some of the barriers to success, and yes, project management I think is the answer. And you're here to learn more about those different aspects of project management that would make you successful. But let's talk a little bit more about what you can do. Baby, work for me. There we go. So the first one is understanding, and you're doing a lot of that today. I mean, you're going into these forums, and you're learning from some very, very astute people, and you're getting some more understanding about project management, understanding and empathy. So let me look at my watch here. I got to see how much time I have. Understanding and empathy. So I'm an IT guy that loves project, that loves process, that loves governance, and now I'm an IT guy that's talking about understanding and empathy. I am not a motivational speaker. Not only that, this is very against my nature. Who here has heard of Myers-Briggs? Myers-Briggs? A lot of people. So I'm an ENTP. In fact, I've taken it 3 times during the course of my career, and every time I was an ENTP. For those of you that aren't familiar with Myers-Briggs, basically it's a personality assessment, and it's for the purpose of determining, based on 4 dimensions, where your tendencies lie. And there's 4 dimensions are you extroverted or introverted? And I mentioned I was an E, so ENTP. Are you extroverted or introverted? Next one is, are you intuitive or sensing? The next one is thinking or feeling. And then the last one is, are you judging or perceiving? Now, having that insight, you can look and say, okay, based on who you are, you would be a good this or you good that. So it gives you an idea of the things that you would excel at. But that's not all it's meant to do. What it's also meant to do is teams generally go and take this together, and what it does is now we know the tendencies of other folks, and we know the strengths of other folks, and it gets back to how do we engage people by knowing their strengths. We know their strengths, and now we know who to put on what, or who to help with what, or who's best for this, or who's best for that, or how I can even talk to you, because that's the person that just sits there and doesn't do anything, but it's only because they're an introverted thinker. It's not that they're not doing anything. They're just not blurting it out like that extroverted guy that as soon as he thinks something, it's coming out of his mouth. So I'm an ENTP. The reason I bring this up is on the E, I think 1 year I scored 1 point on the introverted, but it was all extroverted. The N was NS, was almost a tie, virtual tie, as well as the judging and perceiving, almost a virtual tie. The other one I pegged was the T. I was 0 on F. I mean, I flamed out on feeling. My wife, Molly, is the opposite. She's got 0 on T, although she would probably really argue with that. And she's all F. It's one of the reasons I married her. She brings something to the equation that I frankly don't. So having this here, this isn't me. I'm not the person you come to with an owie. My kids didn't say, oh, look what I did. It's like, okay, well, if you had taken a look at that swing set, you would have seen that there were some hazards there. And you were wearing short pants instead of long pants, so that set you up. And how are you wearing flip-flops in that tam bark? You should have been wearing this. And here's the best Band-Aid now to put it on. And oh yeah, don't forget the Neosporin first and make sure that you change it in 24 hours. When they can go to my wife and all she does is say, oh, you poor baby, and they get that. And that's really what they want, not all that thinking. This, understanding and empathy, it's not something that I'm generally known for, but it's absolutely essential. I learned it far too late in my career how essential it is. So first of all, understand project management. And you're here. That's what you're doing today. What is it? But more importantly, and I'm not trying to get existential here, what is it to you and what are you to it? Understand the discipline and what it brings to you and how it makes you successful. And understand how you can inject yourself into that discipline and make project management successful. And yes, I am asking a lot because that's what I want you to look at. I want you to understand those processes, and I want to understand which ones apply to you. And no, maybe you're not all going to understand every one, but you should understand every one that's touching you. And you're here. This is what you're doing today, and it's a great start. So understand that. Which ones? All that. This is a monumental task, and it's going to take some time. There's things I think you could do immediately. Every one of you, for every project or program in which you're associated, you should know this at the very least. What are you delivering? What is the product or service? And have an acute understanding about that. Not just the piece of work that you're doing that's contributing to that deliverable. You know what that deliverable is. And at the beginning of my career, I didn't care what the outcome was. All I cared about was I'm responsible for network designs. Here's a network design. But having insight into what that final outcome that we're trying to achieve, having an appreciation for what we're trying to achieve, it will change the way you work on that singular component, and it gives that component context. The customer. You're delivering this to somebody. Know who that customer is. And I don't want to hear about your internal customer. Yes, that's important, but it doesn't excuse you from knowing ultimately who are we serving and what value are they getting from what we're actually delivering them. Everybody on the project team should know that. Obviously, who's your project manager, who's your project sponsor, and who are your team members. And that is something you don't have to go to training to do. In fact, if you find, well, when we're asking those questions, we don't have answers, you've identified a problem that you need to solve immediately. But everybody should be able to answer all those questions. They should have that level of understanding of every effort that they're working on. And again, there's nothing that's stopping you from doing it right now. But note this, look at the number of people that I've mentioned in there. And that's where that empathy comes in. Here we go. Because there's people involved. And we need that empathy. We need empathy for all the people that I've listed. But especially, and again, there's an immediacy that you can do this, something you can do right away. We need to have empathy for the people that are handing some work over to you, and empathy for the people that you're handing work over to. So yes, we're functionally constructed. Yes, we have a piece of the pie that we're dealing with, and we're only dealing with this. But all of us, almost all of us start with, unless you're at the very beginning of the process, all of us start with somebody's doing something, and they're turning it over to us, and now we're doing something to it, and we're adding value, and we're turning it over to somebody else. This power of three, this three thing with you in the middle, that exists for every one of you. So you should have an empathy for the person that's giving you something and empathy for the person that you're giving to. So how can we do that? So again, this is something I believe all of you can do immediately. You have an acute understanding of what they're handing you. You have an acute understanding of the process that they go through to hand it to you. And that's going to take some work finding that out. But you should know what they have to do to even get that to you. Because now you can say, okay, why is it hard? What challenges do you have? And instead of just sitting here waiting for it to get delivered to me, is there something that I could do that would actually make it easier for you to accomplish that and hand that over to me? Same thing holds true for the person you're handing it to. What are you handing them? What are they going to do with it once you hand it to them? And what are their challenges now that you've handed it over to them? Having that insight will hopefully start getting you to empathize with the people with whom you're working and start working much more collaboratively with them and much more closely with them. And again, something I believe all of us can do right away. So, the title of the presentation, Why Do You Matter? The word you, I mean, I've said it quite a bit, but if you go back in the PowerPoint, I've actually listed that pronoun 24 times. And it really is about you. So, what's it about? I could have skipped this slide right from the beginning. You're probably going, wow, we could have gotten out here an hour ago? I could have said this. If someone had asked me in a 5-minute cocktail conversation, why do you matter? My answer would be always the same. And this is a concept that I first introduced in my PMO presentation when I was talking to PMO directors. Because when we talk to PMO directors, we talk about product management methodology, we talk about systems and tools, we talk about process and procedures, we talk about policies and standards. But that's not what they're in the business of doing. They're in the business of doing what? Helping others succeed. That's why we have any of those things. And I actually extend it to just about anybody that I'm talking to. And it's something that every single person in here has in common. I don't care what your role is. I don't care how many people report to you. I don't care who you report to. It doesn't matter. Every one of you delivers value in the same way by helping make somebody else successful. And that might seem trite. And, you know, I already told you I'm an ENTP, so this is coming from a T, not an F. We need to remind ourselves. Because we become enamored with our systems and our methodologies and our frameworks and our standards and our policies, all of those things, and they matter to us. And it takes a lot of intelligence and learning and experience to master those things. They're all incredibly important. But really what they're about is, why are we doing any of it? It's to make people successful. And I argue we should constantly remind ourselves of that. Why do I matter here? I matter because if I don't do this, someone's probably not going to be successful. In fact, someone's probably going to fail. And I think that's all the incentive any of us needs to say, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do my job on that project. Because if I don't, it's not that this piece of code won't get tested or maybe this thing won't get implemented today versus tomorrow. If we don't do it, someone's not going to be successful. That's what should get us out of bed in the morning. That's why we should be excited about going into work, not because we're going to deliver some new code, because we know that we're going to make someone successful. Not only that, I think it's a good litmus test for anything that you're doing, because if you can't make that association between what you're doing and who's becoming successful by you doing it, you have a really good argument for why it probably shouldn't be done. So that's more than anything else in some of those tips, I'd really like you to leave that with that today. What you hear, why you matter, it's because somebody else's success depends on it. So I had fun doing this today. Michelle mentioned earlier, she's got a bowl back there. They're going to give some books away. I wrote a book a couple of years ago that talks about why governance, process, and culture are the key to bringing IT and the business together. And it's about breaking down a lot of those barriers and silos and getting people to work as one and work in a team. I've got my contact information there. I'd love to hear from you. Hopefully we'll actually see each other again. I've already know a few of you. I'd love to stay in touch. So please don't hesitate. Have a great afternoon, everybody. This was fun. Thank you.